Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will get started in just a minute, letting everyone sign in and we'll get going. Looks like we still have a couple people joining in, so we'll get started in just a second. Okay, I think we'll get started. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today entitled Meeting 21st Century Distance Education Guidelines. My name is Kim Opelt, and I am going to be your host for today's session. Today, we are honored to be joined by our partners at Delaware Technical and Community College, and they're going to join us for this important discussion on how institutions can meet these 21st century distance ed guidelines while still also providing meaningful and engaging content to students. So our agenda today, as you can see, will really primarily focus on the experience of the Delaware Tech team. But I'm also going to provide some quick introductions, and we'll be also saving some time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to drop any questions that you might have throughout the presentation into the Q&A form on your Zoom platform, and we'll address those either throughout the presentation as needed or definitely also at the end. So let's meet our presenters. Sarah Carter and Kelly McVeigh are instructional design professionals at Delaware Tech. And Sarah, I'm just going to let you take it away from here.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Carter, and I am the Director of Instructional Design and Technology at Delaware Technical Community College. So I have a wide range of experience in education that spans from kindergarten all the way through higher education. My entire degrees in education and educational technology, and I am lucky enough to lead a team at Delaware Tech. And we're responsible for a lot of things, but we provide faculty professional development, support, technology support, and we also get to work collaboratively with administrators and faculty to really transform distance education. Thanks.
Thank you. Now pass it to Kelly.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly McVeigh, and I'm the Vice President for Information and Instructional Technology at Delaware Tech. I've been working in higher education for over 24 years. I was one of the original members of the Center for Creative Instruction and Technology, which is the organization within Delaware Tech that Sarah oversees. And I'm currently working on my doctoral program at the University of Delaware, focusing on how to improve quality in online education, distance education, specifically focused at community college levels. So thank you for having us.
Good timing for those studies. I love it. Thanks. And just to set the stage, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about Delaware Tech.
Sure. So Delaware Tech is the only community college in the state of Delaware. We are an open access institution. We have 4 campuses located throughout the state. And the college is very committed to its mission. We use a tagline that students are the center of everything we do. And we truly mean that, especially in IIT and CCIT. We look at the lens, look at everything through the lens of how it impacts students and how it can benefit our students. On the next slide, just a little bit about Delaware Tech. We're actually the most diverse public institution in the state. We currently have about 13,000 students enrolled, and underrepresented groups account for about 45% of our student population. Next slide. And here's just a little bit about the context that we'll be talking to you about today. As you can see from this chart, this is just right from iPads. 65% of our students are women. 67% are part-time students. The majority of our students are over the age of 24. By far, most of our students are from the state of Delaware, as you can see. And the most important statistic, I think, is that since fall of 2020, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of students enrolled in distance education. So as you can see, nearly almost all of our students are enrolled in only or some distance education. Prior to the pandemic, we were averaging about 30% each fall and spring semester. So again, distance ed as a result of the pandemic has really increased quite a bit. So, and we expect that trend to continue, maybe not to this level, but certainly going to continue in the future.
Right. Yep. So you have your work cut out for you. And
Yeah.
that's part of the reason we're so glad to have you here today to share that experience. And I just wanted to give a little bit of a background on CLASS, just so you know kind of the context and where we're coming from. But if you haven't heard about CLASS, it is a virtual classroom that's built on top of Zoom. So we've worked to take the best of the physical classroom experience and then combine it with the best virtual tools to create a platform that really allows instructors to engage with students on a whole new level. So we have things like engagement tracking and attendance tracking and proctored exams and seating charts. And a few of our most recent features include hybrid class cam. So we've introduced features for the hybrid classroom, including like specific cameras and tools to engage students regardless of their physical location. We've also announced enhanced breakout rooms that allow instructors to manage and push content to either individual rooms or all rooms, and then also oversee what's happening in each of those rooms. And then also our proctor view allows instructors to view a student's camera and monitor their activity during their activity during exams. So CLASS is really designed to provide a comprehensive learning experience regardless of space or place. So with that, I am going to turn things back over to Sarah and Kelly just to provide some details on how they've been working to meet those 21st century distance education guidelines at Delaware Tech.
Thanks, Kim. So as all of us can probably attest to, the COVID-19 pandemic has raised the urgency by which we need to address quality assurance and distance education. And I think that before we talk about quality assurance, it's important to recognize that there are internal and external dimensions of this. So today we're going to be focusing on the 21st century distance education, or proposed 21st century distance education guidelines, which are part of what we're calling external dimensions. So these are regulatory requirements through U.S. Department of Education, Title IV requirements, regional creditors, and state regulations. All of these entities have a role in helping institutions assure distance education quality. And I would say that in the last 24 years, I've spent a whole lot more time thinking about quality assurance in our online courses than we ever have in our on-ground courses. But while those dimensions are important, I think as educators, more important are what we call the internal dimensions of quality assurance. And those are really things that we do at the institutional level. So faculty, as well as administrators in higher ed, need to be paying attention to both of these. But we believe, and through this conversation, we're going to try to show you how we take sort of these external drivers and attempt to build a culture of quality within the institution so that we're really focusing on the internal dimensions and really coming up with shared values and a commitment to quality in order to produce exceptional educational experiences. And we're trying to do this both for our credit and non-credit programs. So for those of your institutions that do both, oftentimes in the past, we've focused exclusively on our credit programs, but more and more we're recognizing that we need to have those same quality standards for both credit and non-credit. Next slide. So when we talk about the 21st century guidelines, I thought it was important for us to have a little bit of context, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. If we were, had more time, we'd do some kind of engaging poll or something like that. Yeah. So right now, I think I saw some questions, but I'll leave that to the end. Sorry. Anyway, back in 2002, the Council for Regional Accrediting Commissions, or what we call CRAC, adopted a set of interregional guidelines for evaluation of distance education, which were really the first national standards that I'm aware of that institutions and accreditors could look to help evaluate quality in distance ed programs. In 2011, that was the last time that CRAC updated their guidelines. And it's also the year that Delaware Tech adopted those guidelines as the benchmark for us internally to evaluate our own distance ed programs and courses. So we basically took the CRAC guidelines and built our distance education curriculum guidelines around them. So we've been using these for quite a while. Since 2013, the NC-SARA, which is the National Council for State Authorization and Reciprocity Agreements, that came into effect. And they started requiring their member institutions abide by the CRAC guidelines. So we felt really good about the fact that we had built our curriculum guidelines around that. However, in 2019, NC-SARA asked that they actually commissioned to have those guidelines reviewed. And in March of last year, there are new guidelines that CRAC adopted and published, which are these new 21st century distance ed guidelines. In June, NC-SARA put forth the new guidelines and is recommending that those be implemented. I don't think they've formally adopted them. I think they're expecting that there's going to be some transition time, but we are anticipating that since we are member institutions of NC-SARA, that we're going to be expected to meet these new guidelines in the future. At the same time, in July of 2021, the U.S. Department of Education revised their requirements for distance education, specifically clarifying and defining what they mean by regular and substantive interaction. So the purpose of this is to say that basically from about 2002 up till this year, there wasn't a whole lot going on in quality assurance, but within the last year, quite a lot of has been published about that.
Thanks, Kelly. And just a quick question that came up in the chat. How do you define distance education? What's included in that?
So at Delaware Tech, we define distance education as instruction that takes place between a student and an instructor at a distance. So we actually include online synchronous, online asynchronous, and hybrid in our formal definition of distance ed. For IPEDS reporting, we only report on online courses, but we believe that quality matters, and that doesn't matter if it's partially online in a hybrid class or a high flex class. We think that the quality standards need to be met regardless of that. So anything but in person, I guess, we consider distance ed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Next slide. Yeah. So we're not going to go obviously through each of the distance ed 21st century distance ed guidelines. There are 23 elements. You can certainly Google them. I think Kim included some resources at the end of the presentation, so you can actually look through each one of those guidelines. They are broken out into these 6 areas. And essentially what Sarah and I did this summer was that we looked at each of the guidelines, and then we brought together CCIT, her group, her team of instructional designers, educational technologists, and multimedia developers, so that they had an opportunity to become familiar with these guidelines. And then we did a crosswalk. We looked at each of the new guidelines and compared them to what we currently have set as our standards or our expectations for quality in distance education. And from there, we identified some gaps. We are going to focus just on 2 of those, but I'll tell you there are quite a few gaps that we've identified or opportunities for us to improve. We're prioritizing those and then moving forward with trying to close the gaps where there's a difference between what was expected in 2011 and what we expect now. Next slide. So these are just some highlights of 2 of the guidelines where we saw there was a significant gap and a high priority. So in the 2011 CRAC guidelines, there is an expectation that institutions are appropriately supporting their faculty in teaching distance ed. So a lot of times we would use this as a way to enforce our faculty to go through some kind of training and how to teach online, how to design courses. The 21st century guideline number 4 really expands upon the expectations of those. So a couple things that stood out to Sarah and I and the team was that there's a continuing investment in both technology and professional development, not just for faculty, but for other people involved at the institution and supporting our online learners. And so we're looking at how we can and need to step up our efforts to provide that ongoing professional development for our instructional designers, our technologists, and especially our student support staff who are really providing those very important online services outside of the classroom. The other piece of this that stood out to us was that there's an expectation that we are providing training on how to use data for improvement. We know that there's a lot of data in our learning management systems and in other educational technologies, and we are not leveraging that to the best of our abilities. So that's one big area that we're focused on. And then related to that is that the institution is also collecting and analyzing data on student engagement, achievement, and feedback. And I think that that's somewhat implied, and some accreditors will probably expect that we are doing that. But I think this is an area where we can identify technology and information that we can then turn back into goals and to improve our academic programs and student success and distance ed. Next slide. So in the timeline, I mentioned that the U.S. Department of Ed in July made effective their new rules and regulations related to distance ed. And this clip, or number 5 out of their very long final definition, is something you probably may have seen in other presentations about the new regulations. But this is an opportunity for institutions to really look at what is expected from faculty or by faculty related to how they are interacting with students. And there is a really strong push to have faculty interact with students on that predictable and scheduled basis, and that institutions are monitoring student engagement and success. And so while I think we do a pretty good job of designing highly engaging online courses, we really as an institution haven't set forth an expectation of what that should look like, as well as how we are going to monitor that student engagement and those, and then help faculty use real-time data to try to help students be more successful in their courses. Next slide. So at the end of that exercise this summer, Sarah and I think, came up with 2 big questions, which is, how we're going to meet these updated regulations and guidelines. And how are we going to do this without saying to faculty, you have to do this because, the US government says you have to, or we're going to lose our Title IV funding. So how do we do this by really building a culture of quality? How do we encompass our shared values and that commitment to improve our distance ed? So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about how we are moving forward in our very long journey to answer these questions.
Thank you, Kelly. And before we dive into how we went about answering these questions, I wanted to bring your attention, if you've read or you're familiar with the guidelines, there's an overview section. At the end, they specifically make mention of the variability within institutions offering distance education. And they also explicitly say that these guidelines are designed to inform, not limit. And so the reason I bring this up is that I want to make sure that everyone who's here attending this webinar, whether you're live, you're going to watch it recorded, that you look at the situation and you look at it from the mindset of your institution. Your institution may be similar to ours. It may be very, very different than ours. So take what you want. Maybe there's things that you're thinking, wow, this would take a lot of resources. That's okay. So we just wanted to make sure that you understand this is our story and our journey of continually looking to improve in that spirit of quality. And obviously, they thought it was important to mention it in the guidelines as well. So keep that in mind as we tell our story. So again, Kim, if you could advance the slide. You saw that we had our challenges. How are we going to meet these updated regulations and guidelines? And how are we going to do this through that lens of quality? So what Kelly forgot in our journey for this is our whiteboard brain dump, what I call it, which I'm actually looking at right now. And it's been up here for quite some time, but this really helped us just frame our mindset with all the moving pieces that were happening. It really helped us just make a focus on what are our next steps. And so she mentioned we did the crosswalk, we did an internal audit, and we reflected and we thought, what are our gaps? As she mentioned, we prioritize things, and you'll see that these are 3 things that we prioritized that I'm going to go into detail. But really, our approach was simple yet impactful. We wanted to move away from that compliance. Like she said, we don't want people to do it because they have to do it. We want them to do it because they want to do it, that they have that appreciation and awareness of quality and why it matters. So if you could advance the slide, Kim. Our first and of course the most fun thing to start with were our policies. So this was really the foundation for us. Just like when you're building a house, you need a solid foundation to withstand the elements so your house doesn't fall down. We wanted to make sure that our plan that we sought out to meet these regulations, meet the guidelines, that it matched our word. So we looked at the distance education policies with a specific focus on first, faculty professional development requirements. So we wanted to look at what do we require? Are there updates that needed to happen? And we put them into place. The other aspect of this from the guidelines that you'll notice is one of the big changes is that it makes mention of making sure that support staff also have these ongoing professional development opportunities. So as Kelly mentioned, our process is not finished, it's still ongoing. So we're going to focus today on what we did in terms of faculty development, but that's something that is also in our little bubble, our whiteboard brain dump, if you will. We also looked at our distance education course definitions, and through a collaborative process with our college community, essentially, we made changes that reflect new technology that allow us to offer different courses asynchronously, synchronously with that multimodal approach. So a great example of this is high flex. So we wanted our definitions to match the new technology, we also wanted it to make sense to our end users, to our students, to our faculty. So we vetted that through our college community, and that is a work in progress. And then finally, as part of this policy section, we looked at our current quality assurance process, and we've had for many years what we call the collaborative course review process, and we use a quality assurance rubric to help us essentially monitor, identify quality. And what we did in this exercise is we looked at this through the lens of that culture of quality. So ultimately, we wanted to make sure that our tool, this rubric that we're using for quality assurance, matched with what our faculty need to create high quality distance educational experiences. We also needed to make sure that our rubric aligned with what the institution needs in terms of monitoring and reporting quality. And again, all of these things are an ongoing process. They do not stop here, but that was our approach. Next slide. Kim, are there any questions that you need to stop and ask?
Nope, keep going. We have some for the end, but definitely keep going.
Okay, so creating buy-in. Remember, we wanted to move away from that compliance. And so we thought, how do we get faculty to buy into the idea to that quality matters? And then the second part of this is, okay, well, if they buy into the idea, how do we give them the means to do that? So Kelly mentioned briefly, CCIT is our Center for Creative Instruction and Technology. And I think it's important that I make mention of this group. And this may be how our institutions differ. Maybe you have your own version of CCIT. Maybe you have a one-man show. Maybe you have nothing. But CCIT is dedicated to supporting faculty. And this group, along with our Information Instructional Technology Division, operationalized this plan. And what CCIT did, one of the biggest, most important aspects of this entire plan to create buy-in was cultivating relationships. And once our faculty, once they know that we're here for them, that was really the foundation for mobilizing our ongoing professional development plan. So we wanted a plan that had a variety of opportunities, and we wanted people to be able to understand what quality was and be able to use it right away. The other aspect of this is we wanted to reach everyone. Kelly shared this great article with me about how the NFL had this lofty goal of engaging every fan in every play. And, you know, that's really what we want to do here. We want to engage our very broad and diverse faculty population. It shouldn't just be for our full-time faculty. And so that was a challenge as we went through this process. And then finally, as part of this, that in order to operationalize our plan, we had to think through a process that was grounded in these fundamental elements of quality assurance. And that's our strategic course design process that I'll get into in just a second. Next slide. So I mentioned our part of our plan is the professional development plan. And so in creating this plan, we paid very close attention to empirical research and the institutional capacity section of the 21st century distance education guidelines. And so as we approach this plan, we wanted to make sure that anything we offered was relevant. It was focusing on technology, strategic design, learning science, pedagogy, authentic assessment, and methods for using data. We wanted to make sure that the professional development was also applicable. Many of us have been through, and of course, probably this session is like this, you just sit and you listen, and maybe you have great ideas, but once you leave the session, you're thinking, how in the world do I actually do this? And so we wanted to create opportunities where they were built into the process, where faculty were able to learn and they were able to apply it right away. The next aspect of our plan that was really important is that the technology we were showcasing was actually available and accessible. And I know many of my team members are here today, and they are probably sick of me saying to them, is this accessible? And, you know, this is really important. And our team approaches accessibility very globally and more inclusive. So rather than thinking about it in terms of disability, we think about it in terms of what types of students. So our students with varying abilities, they have varying situations, circumstances. How are they interacting with our content? And so ultimately, why would we create these quality experiences if not all of our students could access them? So that one, I'll get off my soapbox, but that's a really important aspect of this professional development plan. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that the opportunities we were providing were synchronous, so that real time, and also asynchronous, which is what we call just in time. And so we had a robust schedule, and you can see some of the offerings that we have. We have our Friday coffee talks, we have our lunch and learns, we have our teaching and learning labs, we have a lot of faculty resource guides, which I believe are shared in the resources. We have micro-credential courses. I could probably go on an entire session about all of these, but again, it was a really robust and diverse professional development dynamic plan that really focused on these elements of quality and baked them into our entire process. What I'm going to focus on today is what I'll call our flagship professional development, which is our Course Design Institute. And I would argue that that's probably had the bigger impact on faculty buy-in than all of our other efforts combined. And so core to the Course Design Institute is this strategic course design process that we developed through our various years of experience, through research. And basically this strategic course design process breaks down the process by which we're creating these quality elements into iterative phases. And they truly bake in the elements of the 21st century distance ed guidelines. And what it does is it makes it easier for faculty to implement these quality standards, if you will. Next slide, Kim. So the CDI is really a model of PD that creates buy-in. It created a partnership with us, and it created this commitment to high quality distance education courses that meet 21st century distance education guidelines. Essentially, what it does is it helps us teach faculty how to put students at the center of the learning experience. So it truly allowed us to leverage nearly all aspects of the 21st century distance education guidelines, which without telling them that they were actually the 21st century distance education guidelines, it just focused on what mattered most. And I mentioned in the previous slide that it was our flagship. And what I meant by that is that what the CDI did was it built that foundation of that culture of awareness and appreciation for equality. And it just allowed our faculty to have that baseline and build off of that. So where do we go from here? The next slide, Kim, sorry. As part of the institutional capacity section, it's really important that we continually monitor the quality of our distance education. And obviously our professional development plan helps this, but we also made a commitment to investing in technology that can enhance our learning experience, and obviously using data and learning analytics to make informed decisions. And through all of the professional development opportunities, especially the CDI that I mentioned, we help faculty create content, assessments, and experiences that yield data. But one of the gaps that we identified was, while this data is absolutely relevant, it's not real time. So we wanted to focus on that, investing in technology and data. And that's when we found class, and we started those discussions with class. one of the things that we hope will happen with our partnership with class is that it'll improve those real-time interactions. It's going to boost student engagement. It's going to make our faculty's job a little bit easier in the remote environment, and hopefully make our students feel more connected, even though they might be sitting anywhere other than physically in our classroom spaces. And what we really hope is that this real-time data is going to take us a step further in meeting those quality assurance standards, meeting the 21st century distance education guidelines. And ultimately, our goal is to continue to learn and continue to foster that culture of quality. And we think investing in technology like this can really help that cause. And so I hope that you all enjoyed this session today. I know that there are questions, and what we really hope today is that we've made some other partners in our journey, and we'd love to continue to keep learning with you. So any questions?
Wow, thank you so much. This is so helpful. It's just inspiring to see all of the thought and the data that went into this plan, and how, you know, you're taking some guidelines that could be kind of dry and making it into a really engaging and worthwhile experience for both your staff and your students. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We do have a couple of questions, and if anyone out there has any other questions, feel free to drop those into the Q&A. But I will start with this one, and it is: as you've made these changes, what kind of pushback, if any, did you get from faculty, and then how did you approach their concerns?
Kelly, do you want to take that? Or you want me to take that?
I'll start, and then I think you can add to it. So I was thinking about, you know, that we talk about the buy-in, which is sort of our success. So because of the collaborative relationship with my colleagues in senior administration, I was able to advocate and receive some of the HERF and other grant funding to support stipends for faculty to participate in the CDI. And because of the structure of that, we allowed faculty to submit applications to participate in the CDI. And Sarah knows the data, but I know we had far more people trying to or applying to the CDI than we could accommodate. And what's happened since then, and because of the work that Sarah and her team have done with the CDI participants, we are now kind of using those CDI participants to be advocates and champions for their colleagues. And so now what we're seeing, and Sarah can probably give you some examples, but we're seeing faculty who've gone through the CDI talking about sharing what they've learned, sharing the success of their students in their courses, and then the entire department now saying, wait a second, we want to do what you did. We want to be able to add that to our courses. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to pick up from there. I know that we're putting sort of a silver lining on this, but I'll talk about the positive first.
I think you spoke very beautifully about that. And obviously there are always challenges. And I will say, as much as COVID was a hurdle, it actually helped bring people to us because they were forced to teach in this environment when historically they might not have. And so they needed help. And once they got that help, that it gave them a reason to come back, that they knew that they weren't doing it. I mean, obviously they were teaching in that format because they had to, but they had help where they needed it. And I will just reiterate and say, as Kelly mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, those relationship building has been the cornerstone of what we do. And one of the things that Kelly just mentioned is a lot of our faculty who have been through the Course Design Institute, we love acronyms and we call it the CDI. We started a Teach Champions. And so these are people who maybe they were part of the CDI, maybe they were part of other professional development opportunities we created, but they want to share. They want to be an example for other faculty. And it's been really great. Obviously, it has been met with some challenges, but I think ultimately people just appreciate the fact that we're helping them create these distance education courses.
Great, absolutely. Thank you. And then kind of piggybacking on that, you talked a lot about your faculty as partners and stakeholders. What other stakeholders are involved in this? And then in tandem, what has been the role of the administration and what will be your role to come? How will you report? How will you check in with them, and what are they interested in?
So the administration, so I work obviously very closely with our Vice President of Academic Affairs and her team, and our Vice President of Finance, and then our Vice President for I'll just say, like, she's the one that's really helpful in getting grants, right? So those are really important. I have been very blessed by having a supportive administrative team that has prioritized many of our HERF funding, so the higher education relief funds, to support these types of initiatives. So investments in technology as well as professional development. Moving forward, like other stakeholders that we recognize now that we need to kind of bring into this, I would say our student services support frontline staff, right? So as well as the IIT, or information instructional technology frontline staff. So they have found themselves having to support virtual students without really having a lot of training or instruction or support around that. So we recognize that that's sort of the next level that we have to go to. And that means also prioritizing funding for their training, as well as any technology that they need in order to continue to support those students. And I'll when I say student services, I'm including our tutors, our librarians, everybody, holistically providing the support that our students need. Did that answer our question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And I'm going to switch gears to focus on a couple of more technical questions that have come through. And the first is, do you use any master course shells that are the result of work in the Course Design Institute, or does each faculty member work on their own courses?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is actually a little bit of both. So yes, we do. The hope is that, I'll back up. In the Institute, a faculty member is working on a singular course that may or may not be adopted as this blueprint master course. So, and I think one of the aspects that again helped with buy-in was that faculty weren't voluntold. They wanted to do this. They wanted to improve their course and share it if it wanted to be shared. And we at the college use exemplar courses. So one course might not be necessarily the same college-wide. There might be a couple of different versions of it. So faculty are working on a course by themselves that may be adopted as a master course. And we've run the numbers, and that's when I'm talking about impact. When you look at how many times this has been copied and how many students it impacts, it's incredible, the impact of that. So
great. And then kind of along that same note, how long is the strategic course development process? And then do you plan on using data for your own data for the improvement of the programs?
Yes, we absolutely plan on using the data. And so the strategic course design process, it certainly doesn't happen overnight. And so our Course Design Institute, we've offered it in two different ways. We've offered it over the summer, and it was about 2.5 months. And then we've also offered it during a semester, like a spring semester. That didn't work out as well because faculty were pulled in too many different directions. So the summer really we found to work. And I would say that going through the process, starting from the syllabus to the end, put a bow on it, it's a solid 2 to 3 months that it could take this process. And, add in, you try to make sure that you have open educational resources, you're replacing them with expensive textbooks, you're creating these interactive learning objects. So the process, doesn't have, it's not cookie cutter for every single person, but it absolutely takes a solid 2 to 3 months. And that a faculty member worked one-on-one with an instructional designer within the Course Design Institute, which was another really big positive impact on that process.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And Kim, to add on to that, as far as like program review, obviously the institution's making a large investment of resources and money into trying to improve our courses. So the next thing is, making sure that we have some solid metrics that we can show, or at least correlate to the investments that we're making and student success. So we have some research questions that we are asking. We're currently trying to collect that data. So we know, for example, the number of courses that are using the redesigned course model, or the exemplar courses. And then we're trying to go back and look at student success measures. So how students' evaluations, their grades, their persistence, as well as faculty perspective of how they felt teaching in that different course environment. They went from possibly just having some pretty static PowerPoint slides and a discussion board to these highly engaging, pretty, intense courses where, they're really excited. And I think that, a lot of research shows us that the more faculty are reflective and enjoying their own teaching, the better the outcome. So, and I think that that also relates to all of the data about student success in online courses, which correlates to their feeling of connection with the instructor. So we're hoping that we can find some positive data that supports what we think anecdotally say right now.
Right. Taking that instructor experience that they were, they had the spark to teach in the classroom, and now taking that into an online experience and kind of finding the new normal. I think that's so important and good to hear that you're focused on it. And then, so I'll ask one or two more questions. This is so helpful. Thank you. So what do you think that that learning will look like at your school in the next maybe 5, 10, and 15 years? And then especially with this, this program leading the way is probably the seed to virtual learning and online learning. But what do you see in the future?
Sarah, do you want to take that one first?
So you can take that first.
Okay. Sure. That's like the $1 million question, right? If we could predict that. So what if I'm looking at my crystal ball, I think that our biggest takeaways are the fact that our students need accessible courses, flexible formats, personalized formats. So I see us really working towards meeting those needs. And the very first slides that I showed you were that the majority of our students are part-time women who are older, who often have competing expectations and requirements on their time. So us trying to provide those exceptional learning experiences to a student body that needs instruction that meets their educational needs at a time and a way that is most convenient for them. So as an institution, I mentioned the HERF funds, we've invested quite a bit of money into updating our classrooms to support hybrid, high flex, multimodal, whatever you want to call that sort of new expectation, where we are going to be having our students Zoom into a live class, where students, may physically be in that classroom, but also need to, maybe one day can't get there because they've got, a kid home at sick or something like that. So I think that, sort of the days of an instructor walking into a classroom with PowerPoint slides and a 45-minute lecture are very, I hope that they're, from I hope that those days are numbered. I hope that some of the lessons that we've learned over the last 2 years can bring us forward into a new educational experience for those students. Sarah?
Yeah, I think obviously that's why I had you go first. I think that was excellent. And the only thing that I'll add is that I really think and I hope that as we approach in instruction, that we think about, as Kelly mentioned, that flexibility, that even though you're going in to teach a face-to-face class, that you still should have the tools to be ready if you have to pivot and offer some sort of remote distance education instruction. So my hope for the future is that we have this faculty workforce that even though they might prefer to teach in this face-to-face environment, that they're prepared and ready and they have that student lens in mind for whatever reason a student may not be able to attend class. And especially in a community college lens, I'm sure universities have different struggles, that things come up all the time for our students. And that's, to me, how we're going to maintain that relevance for students is to meet them where they're at.
Absolutely. And I know I promised just one more, but I have two more they keep popping up. And I think people are very interested in your course design process. And I just want to ask two kind of, again, technical questions that came from our audience, and then we'll end on more of a visionary question. But the questions are, how many courses go through CDI and how many instructional designers? And then also, did you have any specific challenges to adapt your technical courses to online settings? So the STEM, health sciences, any like the hands-on courses, were they hard to adapt, or are you doing something different?
Yeah, so the CDI, we started off with cohorts of 50 faculty, and we have 6, let me count them, so we have 6 instructional designers. So each instructional designer has anywhere from like 7 to 10 people, depending on, because we tried to lump together faculty in the same discipline so they could actually work in groups. So while they were working one-on-one with an instructional designer, they had partners in their field within the Course Design Institute. We've offered it in varying formats. I think our most recent one had 30 people. So it was more like a 5-to-1 ratio with instructional designers. And I think that was, my instructional designers will say that was much more manageable than the 8 and 10-to-1 ratio for sure. In terms of those technical and STEM courses, that's an absolute great question. And I will say I follow all the STEM accessibility and things like that, because STEM is absolutely an area that is challenging to make sure that we can create those experiences. So I'll just give a couple of examples of things that we did specifically in those classes. And also, I know we only have 7 minutes left. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Kelly, and we will be more than happy to dive into our process. So we had a faculty member who was chemistry and food science. So our food science instructor, she created a virtual escape room through help with our instructional designers that helped students create an ice cream lab, if you will. And so instead of them physically being on campus, they were able to do this lab in a fun and also meaningful way through a virtual escape room. We had a nursing faculty member create these awesome storytelling videos that she brought in. And I think the story, she likened it to like telling the story of a knight protecting, but it was about blood cells and platelets. And, I remembered it for a while, but it still didn't stick with me. But either way, we created those. We leveraged ThingLink, and we created 360-degree images of our energy lab rooms, things like that. So those are just a couple of examples. And I know that I'm forgetting, we also had our information technology and networking program. We had one of our instructional designers help the faculty member create an interactive where you got to test the wires out to make sure that they were in the right order. So just different things, scenarios that we leverage technology for, that we tried to bring on those challenges. And by no means have we mastered the art of overcoming some of those accessibility challenges, but it's a work in progress.
Amazing. That's so great. And, you really managed to take a concept that's kind of overwhelming and kind of technical and put it into both with this presentation and in real life, just some applicable, small bites that are really exciting and engaging. And that's so cool. So with that, what recommendations would you give to other institutions who are looking to evolve their instruction and maybe even just kind of do what you're doing to reach more students in more settings?
Kelly, do you want to go? Do you want me to take that?
I would just say that it's important, and I'll talk from the administration level. It's really important to know where you are today, and then set a goal for where you want to be. Right. So, make the new guidelines work for you, but you do need to do that inventory. Saying that you want to be the best online institution in the world is a great goal, but if you don't know where you're starting from and have measurable goals, and then you can do all those other things like creating buy-in and funding and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's also important that if you do have departments like CCIT and you do have instructional designers, that you recognize the important work that they have been doing along with the faculty. I mean, those two groups for us have been just probably under recognized. I think in some ways that we couldn't be doing what we're doing without the ability for these people to come every day and want to do exceptional work. So I'll let Sarah speak to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, as I'm again looking at our whiteboard brain dump, there are still things on this whiteboard that we have not gotten to, and that's okay. And so, as Kelly mentioned, it's important to do that crosswalk, do your internal audit and make those goals for your institution. But one of the things that I think helps the most for us is to keep it simple and relevant. And so, as Kelly mentioned, our faculty, the support staff, they have been thrown a lot, especially in the last couple of years. And, creating buy-in starts with making sure that they have opportunities to think about how how they feel about it, and that they have the opportunity to learn and do in the space to make it their own. And so I think that for me, that's the recommendation that I would give, is to really just appreciate each group for what they do. And you're not always, I had a really, really smart boss who told me about, you'll have people that you can get on your side, you'll have them who are kind of like in the middle, and then you have ones that probably will never get over there. Leverage the ones that you can impact that will then have that force multiplier. So
absolutely. Wow. Well, Kelly, Sarah, you have you've provided so much information, and I think your students, your staff, they're all lucky to have you. And thank you for all of the work that you've put into this movement, really, that you're creating at your college. And here are the resources that each of them mentioned throughout the presentation. Feel free to scan for the information. We have all of the links. We'll be sending out a recording. But again, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your perspective and your insight on this. And thank you to all who joined today. And we look forward to seeing you in the near future. Have a great day.
thank you for the opportunity.
I'll leave this up.